Hello, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of your weekly dose of creativity. I hope you've enjoyed listening so far. This week, I've got Ellie on the podcast to talk about all things messaging and confidence promoting yourself online. Ellie's a messaging mentor specialising in helping small business owners like me explain who they are and what they do so that they can share their story online and in the press. I've had so much fun recording this episode and I hope you enjoy listening to it. So my first question is from Rachel, and that's, where in your business could you be having more fun that you're not currently?
Did Rachel know it was me that was coming up?
No, I deliberately didn't tell her.
How fun! It would have been so weird if the question she read was like, what would you like to host a podcast about? I'd have been like, where could I be having more fun? In my content, I think. That's something I really want to work on this year, is that I know that I want to make my content fun, but I still get so stressed about it. And so content creation is something I definitely want to make more fun this year. Great question, Rach.
That is a very good question. And then obviously you need to think of one for the end.
Yes, okay.
So my question based on that then is, what would you do then to make content creation less stressful and fun for yourself? Like, what is missing?
I think having somebody to talk it through with is missing. One of the things I want to do this year is hire or kind of outsource social strategy, not the posting necessarily. I don't actually mind that. And obviously as a copywriter, I don't hate the captions or whatever. And I'm because I can do it, I'm under the misguided impression that I have to do it. But actually, I think just having somebody that I could use to like bounce ideas around, or like my dream is that every month I can sit down with somebody and they can be like, here's what I think you should post. And I'll be like, sick. Like, I'm such a good second in command. So that's my I think that's what would make it more fun, is having somebody else to talk it through with, because also then it feels less like if it fails it's my fault. Not to say that if it fails it's their fault, but just I think that would encourage the spirit of experimentation, which I think is so key on social media. Whereas when it's just me, I have a real like, if this Instagram post doesn't bring in £1 million, I'm a terrible business owner. That's like, I kind of fall into that trap easily, which is obviously untrue, but
what would you experiment with?
Just different. Well, I think I would like to have a more strategic approach, which I know that strategy doesn't sound fun to everyone, but it sounds fun to me. I think I would like to experiment with just really drilling down into the data of like what different hooks work, what different formats work, like different angles, that kind of stuff. I think would be really fun to kind of deep dive on what works. And also like content creation, I think in terms of, you know, the way everything is moving, like much more camera facing stuff, I just hate filming that myself. And so I think having somebody to tell me like what to do, what they want me to film, I think I'd be much better at that as well. So I'd like to experiment with that more, rather than just me being like, what do I have to say that I could stare at the camera for a minute and talk about?
Yeah, no, I get that. And then linked to that, but more in terms of like what you're doing. You're a messaging mentor. You work with small business service providers. Why is it so important for them to get their messaging right, to then create that content, create that strategy? But also, what are we missing as business owners that then when we're like working on it on ourselves, we're not always getting it right? So how do you then work with them to really nail down that message?
Yeah, so I think a big part of what I do, and I don't want to do myself down here, but a big part of what I do is the objectivity piece. And it's the same as I was talking about outsourcing social media. Like I can do it, I just don't want to. And it's hard to kind of see the label from inside the jar. And that's what I help other people with, because you can know that you have a really unique view on something or a unique approach, and you can know that that's what makes you special. But it's really hard to then put that into words, because obviously you live it. So you're just like, well, that's just me. That's how I am. And it's like, and what use is that? Like, how am I supposed to use that to like trust you? And so nailing that messaging piece is really key for knowing how you show up and having confidence, I think, in like showing up, which is not just on social media, but also pitching for podcasts, introducing yourself into communities. Like, I know everyone loves the Slack community at the moment, like a free challenge or membership. It's just so much easier to introduce yourself into spaces and to network and to kind of be known for what you do when you know how to explain what you do.
Yeah. And how do you work with your clients then to help them figure that out? But also, a lot of people will do the same thing as someone else. Like, I'm a photographer, there's thousands of other photographers out there. How would you then work with a client to really make sure that their messaging and their personality stands out and shines through that messaging to make them different and to attract the person that they want to be working with?
So it all starts with a session, like it's up to 3 hours. I think it very rarely takes 3 hours, but it can be up to 3 hours of a session. And I follow what I call the IC framework. So the package I have is called IC Free Introductions. And I follow the IC framework, which is individual. So who you are as a person inside and outside of work. Your client, so like who you work for, how you work with them, what you help them achieve. And then K, which stands for key moments, which is kind of like the story of you and your business and how you got there and kind of the values that story and those key moments underpin. So you chat to me basically about your life. I have a cap that says professionally nosy because basically I just get paid for you to tell me about your life, which is my absolute dream scenario. And then if you're lucky at the end of it, I will provide you with some deliverables. No. But so there's different ways that people can, like there's different, depending on the level of work that we do, there's different deliverables. But so it can range from like a strategy document of like what I've taken from the call, what it seems to me that your USP is, how to put that into words, and then like an example bio, on a social media platform of your choice of like how I would put that across. I can also work with you to write all of your bios, or I can work with you to write all of your bios and also like the first month of introducing yourself on social media, because whilst I think nailing your messaging is really important for confidence and it solves a massive piece of the puzzle, it is still just one piece of a wider puzzle. And so sometimes when you've like got everything ready and raring to go, it's like when you have a rebrand, you're like so excited about it that you're like, oh, this needs to be absolutely perfect. And so I can help people with showing up with that as well. But yeah, it's about fostering a environment of trust and safety. Like I always say to people, it's a brag free zone, by which I don't mean you're not allowed to brag. What I actually mean is like, I'm encouraging you to brag. Like I want people to really big themselves up. And it's about knowing that you are good at what you do, that I'm not questioning that, but that I'm trying to help you find out how to put that into words. Like if you turn up to work with me, there is no question in my mind that you are excellent at what you do, because what you do is what you do, So it's about, helping encourage people into doing that. And just helping put some words into like what other people can see that they can't see, because it's just so natural to them.
And on social, one thing I really love about your socials is that every Friday you do that Instagram story.
Yeah.
Can, for the life of me, remember what do you call it?
Full of Yourself Friday.
Full of Yourself Fridays. I know it was something like that. What has been your favourite responses to those?
Oh,
I should think you've had loads, but I'm just really interested to see what else people have put.
That is a great question. So I love it when people, I think it often works when people have had a client win in the week or something. So they're really riding the high off that. And they're like, I'm really good at, I don't know, say you were a photographer, I'm really good at taking photos that help people feel like themselves or whatever. But I actually quite like the more sarcastic ones, because I think a lot of people still see it and feel resistance to like actually doing it. So I had an artist who put in the social media, put in the box, like crying. And her work is very related to emotions, and she kind of voices a lot of things in her art that I think a lot of anxious people struggle to put into words. And so I said to her, like, I know this was probably meant to be flippant, but I actually think this is kind of an untapped source of your genius, is because you are so in tune with your emotions. Like, if you didn't cry so much, if you weren't so good at crying, maybe you wouldn't be able to create this gorgeous art that connects with so many people. So I do quite like the flippant ones, because it gives me a bit of a challenge of like, I don't always say it back to them, because I don't think that's what people are coming to me for, and I don't want to be really preachy like, well actually, but I do really enjoy it when people present that to me, because it's really good customer feedback of like, how would I turn this around? But it's a good example, a good kind of like, just a good exercise for me to see what the difference is between the way people are presenting and then what they're actually thinking.
What's your favourite part of the whole process of your IC method? Like, do you have a particular part that you enjoy the most?
I think definitely the sessions are the bits I enjoy the most. Like, I come from a copywriting background, so the writing is something I can do, something I'm good at, something I enjoy doing. But the actual sessions themselves, when I get to know people, when we really get to dive deep, that is my favourite part by far. I think specifically I love the bits where we talk about their story, like the key moments. So that's really interesting, because that section of it is based on Simon Sinek's Find Your Why. So he's got like a workbook that he co-wrote with a couple of other people, although I get the impression that they wrote it and he just put his name on it, is the impression I get. I think he was quite busy doing like high-level corporate workshops, and some people were like, let's write a book, and he was like, fine, don't come for me, Simon. Imagine if Simon Sinek was listening to this. I'd be absolutely thrilled. I'm like, hey buddy.
I've just read his It Starts With Why book.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a workbook that kind of builds on that, and part of that, so the whole thing is like you you listen to people's stories and the key moments, but you kind of you separate the facts and what they're telling you from like the kind of underlying values. And that's the bit I really love, because a lot of the time in telling stories, like based on the prompts that I ask, people will be like, oh my God, they'll say on the call, oh my God, I didn't even realise that was connected to blah, but I've only just realised in the asking. And I really love that moment, because I'm like, it's all connected.
And what would your advice be for someone then who's got that down? They've nailed the messaging and they've done like the storytelling. How would you recommend that they then portray that online? Because obviously it's one thing to get the messaging down. It's a completely other thing to then actually sit down, create the content and feel confident enough to share it.
That's a great question. I think part of it is just flexing that muscle. So part of it is just showing up and kind of realising that stepping into your expertise isn't going to create the kind of animal attack that your kind of anxiety nervous system thinks it might do. You're like, I'm actually just posting on Instagram. I'm not running into a stampede of lions. I promise you, body, like I will be fine. So part of it is flexing that muscle, which is crap advice, frankly, because that's not actually practically helpful. I still feel the same. And I'm like, there must be another way though. Like there's got to be something I can just hack. There isn't. That's a shame. I also think thinking of your angles is really interesting. So that's something that I want to work on more in my messaging, but that's kind of, you have your core messaging, but your angles are different ways of looking at it. So you could, you can say the same thing 10 different ways based on a different way that you angle it, that you kind of come at it from. And I think that's a really good way of showing up and hammering the same point and beating the same drum and really kind of saying the thing that you're really confident in, but saying it 10 different ways, in different formats that kind of all work for you on social. Does that make sense?
Yes. Do you want to give us an example?
Oh, on the fly. So I think an example for me would be like that like I said earlier, so like in the sessions that I don't want people to feel like they're bragging. So bragging isn't something that I want to ever allow people to feel like they're doing. So, one of them could be like why bragging isn't a thing, or like what we've got wrong about bragging. One of the things could be how bragging is helpful. One of the things could be an experience I've had with bragging. One of the things could be why I don't allow bragging in my sessions. One of them could be like the research behind bragging, like, and it all points towards the same thing, which is basically to people like, please brag as much as you can. I love it. But it's coming at it from different ways that are going to meet different people at the stages that they're at.
Have you ever had a project where like you've had to think more creatively than normal to be able to get this messaging for the client? And if you're able to, what was it? But also, why did you maybe you found it more difficult, or like it got you thinking, or why? What was it about that project that got you having to think more creatively around?
That's a great question. I think the one that immediately comes to mind is I did some work for a tech startup. And they were really, really cool. They were basically like professional hackers, which was so, so cool. Like I loved working on the project, but as it was something I didn't really know anything about, I had to do quite a lot of research, and that I had to think quite creatively about that, because they wanted to come across with a really personal tone of voice, which is what I specialise in, but it still needs to be quite high level and technical. Obviously, everyone I work with is working at a high level, but it was like specifically there were lots of acronyms and industry insider terms that needed to be there because the people that they were trying to reach would recognise those terms. And so that took quite a lot of trying to reshuffle what they were saying, the kind of the copy they'd given me. It was trying to reshuffle that into how to get across not only their expertise, but also their approach, because they kind of felt like their copy didn't really... It just needed a revamp. I think it was a few years old and it didn't really reflect their brilliant approach. But when you're working with somebody on that kind of thing, especially like in a higher end consultancy project, you want to know that you're going to get along with the people as well as they're going to do the job. And so that was quite interesting. And I had to basically turn it on its head. What I usually do is like make people show up their personality, show their personality more. But with this one, I almost had to turn it on its head and be like, right, we've got the personality piece. Now, how do we weave in the copy piece as well? So that was interesting for me. It was the first time I'd kind of had to do that in that industry.
That just sounds like a minefield. I'd just be like, where do I start?
It was I absolutely loved it though. Like, and it was so fascinating because it was something that I don't know anything about. But and it was like the kind of thing that I actually still don't particularly understand in terms of like, it was systems that were based in something that's called the information of things. So it's called IoT. But it was like so intangible to me as somebody who's never studied computer science, etc., that I was just like, what actually is this though? Like, give it to me in terms that a 28-year-old copywriter girly pop could understand.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was so great, and it was so cool to work with them because it was just such a cool idea. Like, professional hacker is such a sick sounding job title. I was just like, this guy's cool. Yeah.
I'd get caught.
It is legal, I would like to point out.
Yeah, no. But even so, I'd just be crap. I'd start off really well, following all the instructions, and then it'd just go downhill from there.
Mine would be like, have you tried turning it on and off again? Or it'd be like sending like maybe a scam off of 1994 being like, hello, I'm a Nigerian prince and I need this money. And it's like, if you're falling for that in 2024-5, like, come on. So yeah, they were a bit more advanced than that. But
yeah, Dad the other day, he had he messaged like our family group chat going, Jess, Beth, Jess being my sister, have either of you like changed your phone number? And we're like, no, Dad, that's a scam.
Yeah.
So I got that text going, Dad, this is my new number. I'm like, just block it. Just not worth doing.
Yeah, it is honestly. Since I got a WhatsApp business number, which has changed my life, by the way, I love it. But I get so many spam texts a day, and I'm just like, I don't even know where my number is. Like, I genuinely don't think my WhatsApp number must be on my website. But I'm like, guys, who does this work for? Like, who is still falling for these? Come on, I beg.
The amount of spam calls I get as well since my phone number's been on my thing, and most recently has been like someone phoning up asking me about wanting to edit my photos for me, like trying to sell me photo editing services. And they're like, oh, but we're not trying to sell to you. Or like, well, I'm not interested. And they're like, oh no, just stay on the phone. I'm like, no.
No. The calls are getting so sorry, I've completely derailed this chat, but the scam calls are getting so sophisticated now. It's actually scary, isn't it? Like, it's so stressful. So yeah, WhatsApp business is good, but stressful. That's what you need to take away from this podcast. That's what I came on to talk about. That's what it is.
But talking about like having your WhatsApp for business, because I've not got my own business WhatsApp yet, which is something that I feel like maybe I should. But what are like the pieces of tech and the processes that you've put in place that has just made running your business easier?
So the great segue. I love that you turned my absolute inane chat into something that's actually helpful. Genuinely, WhatsApp Business is brilliant. So I use a company called Your Virtual Number or something. It was recommended to me by a friend who already uses it, which means that I have WhatsApp Business on my phone, but with a different number to my actual number, which helps me separate kind of church and state really easily, because it means that I don't get client texts confused with, or like client WhatsApps confused with regular WhatsApps, and that genuinely is a game changer. Like, they're separate apps, they're separate numbers, so that's been really, really helpful. I think I'm pretty low tech, to be honest, in terms of like, because it's just me chilling. But I think another thing that has really helped is I don't know if this kind of relates to your original question, but on the topic of WhatsApp, like having communities that of small business owners that you can kind of sense check stuff with. I love that this entire podcast is just me being like, I need external validation always. And that is true. Having business, well, exactly, yeah. Having business communities that you can kind of check in with. So, for example, I went on a retreat this year and we have a WhatsApp group with those women in there, which is really helpful to just sense check stuff, especially if it's like related to kind of the bigger top level things we were talking about at the retreat. Or I'm part of a co-working community that has a really great WhatsApp chat / heartbeat community. And that's really great as well, because it's so wonderful to just be able to talk to people who get it and will be able to kind of support you through whatever. Or it doesn't even need to be, you don't need to be like on your knees. It can just be like, oh, I need this thing, or I need a recommendation for A. And that kind of stuff has really helped me come a longer way in leaps and bounds, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree. Having a community of people that actually get it is just so helpful, because I spoke about this with Kirsty, who was on the first episode of the podcast, and we were like, our best friends, like from school and from growing up, whatever. They support you and they're really, really keen to help you, but half the time don't understand what it is you actually do. And most of them don't have businesses. So actually creating those connections, those friendships with other small business owners is invaluable, because it provides the support that your best friend or whatever may not be able to provide, because they just don't understand, or they've just not had that experience.
Exactly. And it's, and it goes the other way as well. Like, my two best friends from school are very high achieving lawyers. And so if they talk to me about a work problem, I'd be like, sorry for you, I don't understand international shipping law. I'd be like, cool. I'm actually having my bridesmaids over in next month, and they're all coming and doing a PowerPoint presentation night. So I was like, I want to know what happens when you sit down your desk. Like, what do you actually do? I would love to know.
That's amazing.
I'm really excited about it. And these are friends I've had since school. Like, I've known them for 20 years. I've really but I'm just like, they'll say like lawyer. And I'm like, I'm too stupid to know what that means. And my job is figuring out what people do for a living. Like, that is my job. And yet, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah. But yeah, having people that have like, kind of have that, they can not just sympathise, but empathise. I think that's the great thing about having small business communities, is because they're like, it's not just like, here's the emotional support, which obviously my best friends are incredible at providing. It's like, here is a practical thing that I have tried, and these are my, and that's just invaluable for a job that often feels like you're kind of, going through the weeds on your own.
Yeah. You created a bit of a community on Substack, I'd argue, with your caring is cool. Can you just explain a little bit about like what that is for anyone who might want to follow it? Also, how it came about, like how did you come up with the idea for it? Yeah, tell me all about
course. I am basically, here's a very quick life story. Started the business that I now run, Ellen and Molly, started out as a wedding copywriting specific business. And I set that up when I was at uni, and people thought it was really bizarre that I was so obsessed with weddings when I was 21 years old. And I was like, I think it's weird that you think it's weird. And so I set up a sister business called the Enthusiast. And that is kind of, they are very similar. A lot of my work with Ellie and Molly is encouraging people to be, they all work under the same umbrella, right? My external why is to help people be more themselves, whether that's in their business, which is kind of the Ellie and Molly side, or whether that's just in life, which is the Enthusiast side. And I had a Flowdesk mailing list, which I also have for Ellie and Molly, but I had it obviously for a separate segment. And I just realised that I wanted more of a community feel, because I think so much of the power of the Enthusiast and what I'm trying to build there is kind of almost trying to start a movement and realise that there are lots of other people out there who feel the same, and that we're not as alone as we might feel like we are in the certain spaces that we operate in. And so I created a Substack so that I could still, have somewhere to ramble, but that people could interact and chat and kind of see it on a more visible platform. The plus side to having that Substack is because I don't have a website for the Enthusiast, so it's not like any SEO plagiarism, because when I did have a website for it, I felt quite torn as to like where I should post certain things. I found that really difficult, like, oh, is this a blog post or is this a Substack post? But now that I don't have the website for it, it just feels like that's the online home for it. And it's been so wonderful, like meeting people, not meeting, but like meeting them online and learning about what they find, what they have enthusiasm for. I spoke to a barista at my local coffee shop. She invited me to a latte art competition. Like, I don't even drink coffee, but I loved going because it was so cool to see people get so excited about like making swans out of foam. I was like, sick, love that for you. Like, it's I was once at a house party when we were at uni, and I spent about 45 minutes listening to a guy tell me about, and I was in a relationship already. FYI, this wasn't like a chirpsing situation, as the kids maybe probably still don't say. But I spent about 45 minutes listening to him talk about his thesis, which was in physics, because he was just like so enthusiastic about it. And I was like, I genuinely am so happy for you. I just love it when people tell me what they're enthusiastic about, even if I have no reference point. Because I think it's really cool that what people are interested in, it really opens your eyes to a whole other world that you don't know exists.
I feel like more people need to be like that as well, because it's just, like you say, it just opens your eyes to so many other different scenarios.
And it helps you see things in a different light. Like, now whenever I order a mocha or a hot chocolate or whatever, I'm like, look at that beautiful art. Look at that beautiful latte art. Like, somebody's really taking care of that, which I wouldn't have necessarily consciously thought before. I knew that there were people who did entire competitions to like create seahorses or whatever.
Yeah. You recently asked on Threads, but I think you did it on Instagram as well, because that's where I originally had the conversation with you about it, was what did people do their dissertations on? What was your favourite answer to that?
All of them. It was so, honestly, basically, I just wanted to like tag everyone that replied and be like, can I read your dissertations? Like, I think it's so interesting. What was my favourite? I mean, I don't want to pick favourites, but I think what I really loved was the ones where I could see a direct line, even if it wasn't super direct necessarily, but like a correlation between what they wrote the dissertation on and then what they ended up doing. So this is all inspired by a website designer called Kime. They wrote about their dissertation in their email, like newsletter, the Petri Dish. And it just got me thinking, and I think theirs is about accessibility in the game Elden Ring. And I've had Kime on my blog to talk about how they really lean in with weird, and I love their vibe. So they were kind of the catalyst for the conversation, but there was all sorts of incredible stuff of, one person who runs a small business kind of mentorship coaching program, but her whole thing is like not buying into icky sales marketing. You know, she did her dissertation on like Canadian policy reform, and it was like, okay, so you've always been like social justice minded. It was so cool to see that. And you know, there were other people who wrote about, like Vix Meldrew, who is a course kind of creator and architect and strategist. She did a teaching degree, and so hers is about primary school children, I think, and it's so cool to see how that translates now into what she does, which is helping people create learning opportunities and like how they construct their courses and stuff. So yeah, what I really loved was seeing, and I know we had that conversation as well, didn't we? Because you said about, was yours was about injuries and horse riding, right?
Yeah. So
which like obviously doesn't seem directly correlated necessarily to photography or kind of creating, but I bet there are. If I could see the top level, I bet I could find a thread that pulls it through. That's my favorite thing to do, because like mine was about One Direction fangirls, which was all about how kind of they were demonized for being enthusiastic. So mine was plainly transparent, I think. Like mine was like boringly transparent, I would suggest.
I love that though, that your, like you say, your dissertation was so transparent, and it's you just taken that on into your like day-to-day career.
I had the advantage of only doing mine a few years ago. I did my master's during COVID, so I didn't do a dissertation for my first degree, because you either had to, because I did philosophy and I hated it, and I tried to drop out 3 times, and it was just like, would I rather take 2 exams, or would I rather write 10,000 words about something I don't care about? I'd rather take 2 exams. And that shows how badly I hated it, because why would I want to take 2 exams?
No.
I know, who chooses that? This guy does. When I went in to see my dissertation tutor to like tell them I wasn't doing a dissertation, this is 3rd year, obviously, and they said, oh, hello, are you enjoying your 1st year? And I was like, no, you've been my tutor for 3 years. I've just never turned up. And they were like, okay, cool. That's how bad it was. But yeah, so I didn't do mine 10 years ago. I did mine 3 years ago. So I kind of had the hindsight of shaping it to be a bit more obviously related, because I already knew what I was doing, but it was still, still really interesting to see things in a different angle.
So going back to how you've built your community for both Ellie and I and the Enthusiast, what would your advice be for someone wanting to do something similar?
Great question. I think this comes with the hindsight of not having intentionally built communities. Like I didn't set out to, I mean, with the Enthusiast, I kind of knew that I wanted to start a movement, whatever that meant, but it, you know, I didn't set out to create communities. But I think looking back, the key thing has been being really authentic, which again, isn't like, it's one of those things where you're like, I just want a hack. Like I want something, I want a 4-step formula I can follow. But I do think that the reason I'm so lucky to have such an engaged community and kind of people who really get it is because I've never pretended to be anything I'm not. And I've been really clear about what I've wanted from it. And I've been transparent, I think, in when I've changed direction about why, so people haven't felt blindsided, you know, when I left the wedding industry, that kind of thing. But part of that is also, you know, I don't want people to think that means you have to share everything, because for example, like at the back end of 2023, start of last year, I was really, really ill. And I didn't share that at the time because it felt like it would be coming from the wound and not the scar. Like I wasn't in a place where I could talk about it. And I think one of the things that we often feel like we have to do if we want to be authentic is we feel like we have to share absolutely everything, but we don't owe our followers and community that at all. Like we don't owe them every piece of our life. And a lead generation coach that I know, Zoe Dew, she said something the other day on a call, which was, I show 20% of myself 100% of the time, which I think is a really great way of thinking about it. Like you can be constantly visible and feel like you're giving your community loads of you, and be giving your community loads of you without giving them all of you. And I think that's a really great way of building a community whilst also staying sane and not losing yourself in it as well.
Yeah. And how would you then advise someone to like set those boundaries?
Oh, I think part of it is trial and error. Like part of it is just when you share something you think like, no, thank you. Then you have to just remember, like, don't do that again. I think having scripts of like, you know, say somebody asked you about something that you didn't feel comfortable sharing about, which is very infrequent, but having a kind of rehearsed response that you have is really helpful to be like, that's not something that I feel qualified to talk about, you know, especially kind of in terms of my medical issue. I didn't want to be spreading misinformation. So I was very much like, that's not something I feel qualified to talk about. And kind of, giving yourself a script to be able to kind of push back with people, I think is really key. I think the conversation around boundaries sometimes does go too far the other way, as in like, people sometimes mistake just like doing what they want for being like, I have really good boundaries. And it's like, okay, but there still has to be some kind of push and pull. But majoritively, I think it is just, pushing to the edges of where you feel comfortable, and then having something in place for if people do push those boundaries where you know that like you put them in for a reason. And so rather than having to act from that place of fear and anxiety and panic of like, oh, I've got to write a response, oh my God, you could just have something that you could be like, no, this isn't for me, but, you know, hope you find whatever you're looking for. I think that can really help in the moment, just kind of like diffuse the panic and the anxiety you feel about whatever you're worried about, you know, appearing like you don't want to help, or appearing like you're cold, or appearing like you don't care, or whatever.
No, because you can, like you say, you can have the boundaries, but still care about the community you're building and stuff like that. But they don't have to know
And
every single thing
arguably
about
having,
you.
yeah, and I was going to say arguably, but not even arguably, like having boundaries makes you a better community leader, because it means that you're not going to burn out as quickly, and it means that you are able to bring your full self to work as opposed to half of yourself to work. You know, it's much easier to switch off, which you need for creativity and for communication, and it just makes it so much easier. So I think, you know, definitely categorically boundaries make you a better community leader, and it helps you show up more and also achieve your goal faster. Like whatever you're building that community for, the better you are at withholding your boundaries and making sure that it works in the way that you want it to and works with other people. Like everyone's a winner.
Yeah, and I'd argue as well that it actually also gets you more respect as that community leader as well. I think having those boundaries, people just automatically are more likely to respect them and respect you for the work you're doing. Whereas if you gave everything away all of the time and then suddenly put those boundaries in place, people would be like, wait, what?
Yeah, exactly, because they're confused. And also, I don't think it's... I think they also see you as more of a business owner rather than like somebody they can just lean on for anything. So like, you know, and I say this as somebody whose vibe is very much encouraging people to be like very pally on the internet and very much themselves. But I do think, you know, I've known a lot of small business friends who have cultivated a persona online where people just think they can take the piss with like how much they requested them, how much they ask of them, the unwanted intrusions they have on their personal life. Like, you know, I've known people who have been told not to buy a house because they're too young, or have been, like, people just expect wild stuff from them. And so, yeah, I think you're right about the people kind of see you as a business owner and they realise that there are layers and levels and lanes in which they can stay in, and that's absolutely fine. It doesn't make them it doesn't make them respect you any less. In fact, as you say, they're like, okay, that's their thing and they're really fucking good at it, and that's why they stay in that lane. It's like, great.
Yeah. How would you then have, so say you knew someone who had maybe they'd been told they've got to be 100% authentic all the time. They shared more than what they're comfortable with. And then they're starting to want to actually put those boundaries in place. How would you advise them to do it in a way that would still maintain like respect, like integrity, and wouldn't confuse people?
Think it depends on kind of your willingness to be open about why, and obviously that is very situation dependent, but I do think there is a lot of power in a public post about, you know, saying going forward I will be no longer doing this. I've had the chance to kind of reassess how I show up on these platforms, for example, and, you know, going forward I will no longer, but, you know, we've seen a lot of people do it with like showing their children's faces online. And it's a lot of people feel like it's a bad thing that they didn't realise it before. But actually, we only know what we know. So when we get new information, it's good to change our feelings and approaches to it if that's what we feel we need to. So you could just say something like, you know, and you could explain the reasons why, because I think that's a great way of being personal while still being authority building, of like, you know, here's the things that I have decided. Here's the reasoning. And then you can just, you know, place your boundaries in it and just say like, so please, if you... I don't know what the situation would be, but like, you know, if you ask me something about this, I won't reply. It's not because I don't care, but it's because that's not something I'm willing to talk about anymore. And then, you know, depending on what the situation is, you can like direct people to other resources or share other people who are talking about those kind of things, which is still very helpful, but firm. I think firm but fair and friendly is a hard balance to strike, but it can be done. And it's just, yeah, putting your reasonings forward. If you want to, you don't have to explain yourself, but I think that is a really helpful piece in helping people understand and hopefully getting less pushback. Although I think we don't often actually get the pushback that we think. Like, you know, it's still, you know, I know somebody currently whose parent is in hospital and they've just had a lot of shittiness in their DMs, I think, about their response times or whatever. And they've said, like, they want to explain what they're going through, but they also don't want to go into detail about it, which is totally fair enough. And so I think having something that kind of speaks to everything that people need to know and then shuts down the conversation once and for all is good to put out there.
Yeah. What has been your favourite part of building these online communities?
Getting to know people, which sounds really boring, but I think the the random avenues it takes you down. Like, one of my favorite things in the world is to send, like, if I see something, to send it to somebody and say, oh, I saw this and thought of you. And when people do that to me, it's my favorite thing in the world. I'm like, thinking of me, oh my God. So yeah, that's my favorite thing, is like when people get to know you on a level where they see something and they think of you. I think that's so lovely. Like, it's such an honor to be part of somebody's day, I guess. So that's a real favorite of mine.
My final question for you then, I think, is where do you feel most creative within your business? Like, what if you were to have your most creative day, what would it look like?
I think it's a great question. I think when I'm in the like ideation stage very early on, I've got big paper. I love big paper so much, Beth. It's the love of my life. So when I've got big paper out, I've got pens, I'm having a nice co-working day somewhere, there's a mocha on the side, there's a pan au chocolat on the go. When I'm at the ideation session, like stage, but I don't have to think about the numbers yet. When I'm like very much like at the start, like what do I do? What do I bring? And I can just think about the containers without the kind of like practical elements to it. That's when I feel like my most creative, because, and I guess that genuinely is when I'm at my most creative, like by definition, because I know I haven't yet put the kind of like restrictions on myself, but I love that stage because it feels like anything is possible. And I think that's really, really fun. And that's something I'm trying to cultivate more of in my business, of like, okay, but what if there were less restrictions though? What if this is something you've imposed on yourself? Like, what if this is not something you actually need to do? You just feel like you need to do. So it's a very pertinent question, because I'm trying to create a lot more of that in mind. What would you say for yours? Yeah, don't just ask the questions. Hard, isn't it, Ben?
Why do you think I'm on this end of the podcast?
Hey, I ran one for 5.5 years. I know it very well. There were questions we asked people where I was like, well, glad you're answering it.
I feel my most creative when I'm working collaboratively with people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm very much an extroverted introvert. So, like, after a day of collaboration with someone or whatever, I will be absolutely knackered. Like, social battery will be, like, down here. But whilst I'm in that moment, I'm just loving it. It's why I'm, like, I've restarted the podcast and stuff like that, because I just like connecting with people. And again, that's more of what I'm wanting to do this year. I'm wanting to figure out within my business, like, where I can bring more of that into it. So any sort of like creative project that is very collaborative is probably what my answer would be.
Yeah, that's fun. I like that a lot. There's a meme where it's like, craziness is just two dumb bitches saying exactly to each other. And I feel like that's a lot of fun stuff, is when it's just like two business owners being like, exactly. And they're just like hyping themselves up. I love that.
Yeah. I love it as well when you're particularly working with someone who's like on the same energy as you, and it just descends into chaos. Like, creative chaos is like my favourite thing.
Yeah, absolute dream.
Yeah, like, I think it's probably the ADHD in me, but like it can turn crazy very, very quickly. Caveat, I do actually have ADHD. I'm not just saying that, but it's just like, if it's fast paced and it's just descending into chaos, the better the project will end up, because it's just like, who knows where it'll end up, but we'll have a lot of fun and we'll be very creative in the process.
And there's such an argument for inviting more chaos in, I think, like, especially as you grow your business, you kind of, well, at least in my experience, like, because I kind of started it very young, and it was just kind of like, oh, well, I'll try this and see what happens. So that was fun. And then as I grew, I was like, I need to put some things in place, which was true, and they served me well. But then also there does get to a point where I'm like, have I put too many things in place, and could I just like be a bit, more free with it? And so I think there's a big argument for more chaos in business. Good kind of chaos though, not the scary kind.
In which case, I know I said it was my last question, but it's not, because I've just thought of another. Where could you add more? Yeah, it is linked to your business.
I think I could be more chaotic in my offers. So like, I have a real structure to my offers, which I have loved, but I think just coming up with stuff and just like experimentation, just seeing what happens, I think that could be more chaotic. Like, if I just kind of threw spaghetti at the wall and then see what stuck and what felt good, and then obviously it would actually have to have some kind of legs. I could just be like, here's all the stuff I'm doing, and people be like, nobody's going to pay you for that. But I think, that's where I think I could be a bit more chaotic, just being like, oh my God, and I could do this and I could do this, and then one day I end up and I'm like, where did I come up with all these ideas? Like, this is insane.
So I think that's where I need to put more restrictions on my business. At the moment, I'm offering far too much, and I need to like really like niche it down. I'm trying to figure out how.
Yeah, but I think it all goes in seasons, and like, I do think that's probably because you've enjoyed a season of like harnessing the chaos, and I think I've done the opposite, where I've like really tried to, and actually maybe I could bring some of it back. It all just ebbs and flows, doesn't it?
It does, and I think as well as like business owners, particularly like when you're working in a creative industry, where you want to channel that creativity changes. So when I first started my business back in university, it was very much all I wanted to do and all I wanted to be was an equine photographer. That's the link between my degree and my... And then like it gradually descended into weddings, and then I got a part-time marketing job, and I really loved the marketing and social media and stuff like that. And now I'm just like, right, what do I want to bring more of? What do I want to get rid of? Like, I'm very much in that sort of like transformation stage. I'm just like, I am now offering too much because I never got rid of an offer as well. I just kept adding on.
Yeah. It's I'm excited for you though. That sounds like it'll be really transformative when you get there.
Question is, when will I get there? But we move.
I said when, not if. I believe in you. Okay, this is a very positive feeling I have.
Yeah. So you want to add more chaos? I want to add less.
We need to do that creative collaboration thing, and then we derive at the perfect amount of chaos.
Yes. Let's do it. So my last question then for you is, what is your question for the next guest? Because I feel like that's a good place to end it, because otherwise we'll be here for hours. So what do you want to ask the next guest?
Two-parter. One, if you had an academic era, what was your dissertation, and can you see any similarities to like what that is and where you are now? And then two, what are you enthusiastic about in your business for the upcoming year?
Oh,
sorry for doing a two-parter, but I do love the dissertation chat.
Yeah, no,
and also I wanted to give an option in case people didn't do a dissertation. Obviously, like, I didn't want people to feel bad if they don't, because it's like, you escaped uni. Well done. I'm actually jealous.
Same. Amazing. Thank you.
Yay. Was that the good kind of chaos or the bad kind of chaos?
That's a perfect kind of chaos. And then, obviously, where can we find you online? So if people want to follow you, they want to go find your Substack, like, give us all the links.
Are you ready? Okay, so I am on Instagram at Eleanor_Molly. That's Molly, i.e. my grandma was named Molly, but she's named after a horse, and she hated that, and hers is the Y, so mine's with an IE instead. That's just some fun Kime lore for you. And my website there is eleanormolly.co.uk, and that's for freelance copywriting and messaging. And then, if you want to find me on Substack, it's at the Enthusiast & Co on Instagram, or caringitscool.substack.com. I think. Yeah. Where it's been through a few iterations. The chaos continues. Which is where I talk about all things enthusiasm and caring in a world that doesn't always encourage it.
Amazing. And I'll double check all of that and I'll put it in the show notes so
thank you.
Can find it. Amazing. Thanks so much for your time.
Oh my god, thanks for having me. It was fun.